This is David Rizzo with Rogers Gardens, and today we're going to be talking about different peppers and different chilies and how to use them. Okay, with peppers, there's always two categories, your sweet peppers and your hot peppers. So I'm going to start off with the sweet peppers, and really I'm going to talk about the varieties and how to use them, and then later I'll talk about cultivation. And with the sweet peppers, the ones I'll start off with are the bell peppers. So there's a lot of different bell peppers, and so there's the red beauties, there's the new wonders and the Cajun bells, but I do like the red, the gold, and the yellows because they're sweeter. The green bell peppers are really good, but they can be a little bit more bitter. I do like the red beauties, and so this is one of the red bell peppers right here. This is the gold one. So one of my favorite things to do with the gold and with the red, I like to slice them really thin, and then I'll put a little olive oil with them and I'll roast them in the oven, and then I can use that in everything. And bell peppers in general, it's always good to plant a few more because they're light producers. You might only get 6 bell peppers off of one plant, so if you like bell peppers, put in 3 or 4 or even 2 to 3 on each color or each variety. Now some of the other sweet peppers that I like, there's a pepper that's from Japan that's called shishito, and shishitos are really good. Shishitos, what I use them for is I like to actually saute them with a little bit of sea salt, and they're really sweet. You might get a hot one once in a while, but shishitos are really good. Good producer and sweet, but very good frying pepper or fresh eating pepper. So that's shishito. And then another pepper that I use a lot are some of the Italian peppers. So you have like the bull's horn and the corno di toros, and all of these are longer, bigger peppers. And so I brought one of the red ones out, the red corno di toro. And so these are longer peppers, and they're really good. They're sweeter. I love to actually slice them up and again roast them in a little olive oil and a baking sheet. And these get bigger, but there's 2 types. There's a red, there's a yellow. There's another variety called Jimmy Nardello that's a really good Italian frying pepper because they fry them, and you can actually put these in sauces like I put them in marinara, cut them up. It's just they got flavors. Once in a while you will get a hot one out of them, but the flavor is really good on them. And the one thing I'll talk a little bit later about cultivation and even like harvesting them, but these are really good to use for fresh eating and for frying and just sauteing. And the second group of peppers that I'm going to be talking about are the hot peppers. So the hot peppers, when you're looking at them, one thing I always like to talk about these is that they rate peppers by the heat by Scoville units, and that's how hot the pepper is. I'll talk about that later, but the main thing with these, some of my favorites and some of the varieties I use a lot for cooking and for fresh eating, which one we have. So this is the first one, some of the Thai peppers, and the Thai peppers are what they call bird peppers, and Thai peppers are really hot. They use them a lot for cooking for like kung pao chicken, and there's different dishes, but Thais can be really hot. On the Scoville units, I think most Thais go like 30 to 60,000, but flavor is really, really good. Most people might know the Thai peppers too for certain sauces they use, but Thai peppers, they call them bird peppers because they're very skinny, and sometimes the birds do eat them in some countries, but they get a little taller. Production is great on them, but again, you could use them drying, you can use them fresh. Pretty warm though on the Scoville unit, so hot pepper, good for frying. Other one that I like is the chili diablos. Now the chili diablos, they're a chili that they'll use dry a lot for making like a hot sauce. So this is like a taco sauce. So what they'll do is they'll take the dried ones and they'll actually saute them, and then they'll mix them with water, and they'll actually make a really hot taco sauce. And these are usually about 10 to 20,000 Scoville units. But one of my favorites because the flavor is so good on them. So that's chili diablo. So that's a good one. What do we have? Okay, we have padrones. So padrones are a really good pepper from Spain, and they actually use these a lot in frying too. They will saute them with sea salt. One of my favorite things to do is I like to roast them in the oven for about 6 to 10 minutes. I take them out, I cut them open and take the seeds out, and I put cheese in there, and then I put them back in the oven and I bake them. But that's the padrones, and the padrones have a medium heat. Like a Serrano, about 7,000 to 9,000 Scoville. So not really hot, but not really mild, but right in the middle. So that's a good one. Anaheim. So Anaheim is the classic chili. There's so many different varieties of chilies. You have Hatch, you have Anaheims, you have New Mexico Heritage. There's so many of them, but I do like the Anaheims because they do really good in our climate. I've always had good luck with them. You can pick them in the green stage and roast them, or what some people do is they'll let them get all the way red and they'll actually roast them, and then they'll soak them in water and make like an enchilada sauce out of them. So when you see California peppers at the market, these are Anaheims because they're a variety grown in California. And so this is a really good one. Mild, very mild. The Scoville units on an Anaheim are about 3,000 to 4,000, so very, very mild. But the flavor, that's one thing I always go after when I'm growing any peppers, is the flavor. So what else do we have that I can show you with them? I wanted to show you, oh, here's another one that they grow a lot in Mexico called guajillo. Now guajillo is another one that they actually will let them dry, and then they'll soak them in water or saute them and then soak them in water, and they make a really good enchilada sauce out of these. So the guajillos are really, really good, and they're mild heat too. They're probably 2,000 to 4,000 Scovilles, which is mild, hot, but not so hot. And so these are really good. Then you go into the hot peppers. I didn't bring any really hot peppers up, but I'm talking really more about how to use them and what varieties I like for using. So these are Scotch bonnets, and Scotch bonnets are into the islands of the Caribbean like Trinidad and Jamaica. I guess they're mostly known in Jamaica for making like the jerky chicken. Now, one thing that's good about the Scotch bonnets, they're hot. They're about 100,000 to 200,000 Scoville. So they got some heat to them. They got some kick. But the one thing that makes this pepper so good for cooking or for making a sauce or a marinade out of is the flavor. So these have more of a citrusy flavor. So what people do with these, they'll harvest them, they might roast them, or they might put them over the fire and roast them, and then they'll blend them into a sauce and make a marinade for different meats. But very, very good. But again, this is a hot one. So that's the type of habanero Scotch bonnet. So that is a really good one. Oh, serranos. If you don't want really hot salsa, you can use other peppers, but this one, I always use about a half to about 2 serranos, and I cut them in half, and I like boiling them. That's one way I learned about making salsas. So I might put maybe 1.5 serranos into boiling water with onions, with a couple tomatillos, and about 4 romas. And then I'll do like a clove of garlic, and I'll boil it for 10 minutes. I'll put it in the blender. I'll do a cup of the water out of that, a little bit of salt and pepper, and maybe some lime, and I blend it. And that's a very easy salsa to make, but always do tomatillos. Some people do like to roast all of their vegetables, like the peppers, and then put them in. You'll get more of a charred or more of that smoky flavor. And so that is one of the top varieties for making salsa. And the other chilies that I'm actually out of right now are jalapenos. I love jalapenos. And so jalapenos are one of your best peppers for cutting, fresh eating, for salsas, you can put them on everything. Now their Scovilles are mild too, about 2,000 to 5,000 Scoville units in the heat. Now Serrano's a little hotter, they're about 6,000, so they got a little bit more kick to them. But there's so many varieties of jalapenos that we'll get in, and one of the events that I'll touch on that we'll have a lot of them is when we go into Peppermania. So that's in a few weeks. So that's one event to really watch it. We're gonna bring a lot of good varieties in. And there's another one that I really like is Ancho Poblanos. So the Ancho Poblano peppers are so good for roasting, but one of my favorites to do is I'll take and put the Ancho Poblanos in the oven and roast them for about 7 to 10 minutes. I'll take them out, I'll cut them open and take the seeds out. Then I'll get a cheese called queso ranchero, and I'll put that in with a little bit of Spanish rice, and then I'll roast them for 7 to 10 minutes and let that cheese melt down. But I love that cheese because it's not oily, so that's a good one for doing like a baked chili rellenos. That's the same pepper, but it's very mild, maybe 1,000 Scovilles, but it's the smokiness flavor that you have with those peppers. Okay, when cultivating peppers, you really want to find an area that gets 6 to 8 hours of full sun. So peppers like heat. So you never want to put them in the shade, but you always want to find an area that gets 6 to 8 hours of sun, because they need that sun to flower, to ripen their fruit. And with spacing, in terms of when you're planting them, I do like to give peppers room. So sometimes if I'm doing like the bell peppers or the shishitos, I found that by giving them a little farther apart, and sometimes I'll space them about 2 feet apart, because what I found with a lot of peppers, they branch and they produce off of the sides. So if you crowd them too much, you won't get as much production. You'll just get production off the top. So that's the one thing that's very important, is not just the sun and then I'll talk about soil later, but mainly is giving them enough space so they have enough sun. With peppers, and this goes into the hot peppers, this goes into the sweet peppers, you really look at the season. So I always start planting my peppers in April. Usually it could be early April, it could be mid-April. I want to get most of them in by May, because a lot of these peppers will start flowering and setting their fruit as we go into more like June or July. And when planting peppers in containers, I'm using about a 17 to 18 inch pot. That way I can put 3 pepper plants into a pot. And I'm just using a really good draining potting soil. And what I like to do is I'll take them out of the container, set the container on the ground, and see when the roots are sort of a little bit tight in the bottom. I always will sort of massage the roots and loosen the roots a little bit. And then what I do, let me move this one back and I can show you. I don't want to put it really deep, but what I do is I like to plant it level. So I'll make a little hole with my gardening trowel, make a little hole, and I'll sort of set it in here, and then I'll just sort of press it in, and then I'll go through and I'll just level it out more, and then I'll give it a good watering. And when growing peppers, when you're growing them in the ground, I always want to break up that soil, especially if you're dealing with heavy clay. So when you're dealing with heavy clay, I like the Malibu compost to break up that heavy clay, because peppers need good drainage and they need room for their roots to really grow. So I'm breaking up the clay with my compost that has a little bit of sand in it. That's important. You know, a lot of people are just using straight compost and the soil can get really clumpy, but this has a little sand in it, so it helps break up that clay and helps from binding up. Another thing that I like is I like the worm casting, so nutrients. When you're growing peppers, whether it's hot peppers, whether it's sweet peppers, you want that nutrients and you want this to break down. That's very important. And so, because peppers want good drainage and they don't want to be overwatered. So that's growing in the ground. Break up that clay and make sure you space them apart and get those nutrients and work those nutrients on the surface. I like to take the worm castings and work them good on the surface. That's important. That's how they break down. Just don't lay them on the surface. Work it in about 2 to 4 inches down. That's important. And with growing them in containers, you want to use a container that's always about 18 inches, 17, 18 inches wide, and you can put more than one pepper into a container. But I like a fast draining potting soil. This Malibu has more perlite, has more pumice. It's a very rich potting soil, but it drains. So that's important with growing them in containers, is good drainage also. And when talking about peppers and fertilizing, peppers are heavy feeders, so I always like to make sure I'm feeding them consistently. So when I'm planting them, either in the ground or in containers, I'm making sure I'm feeding them. I like to use more of a balanced fertilizer, so I like something that has even numbers. And so when you look at this one, this is one of my favorites. This is the down to earth all purpose. So you look at the first number, which is nitrogen, that's the growing. 6% is your phosphorus, and that helps out the fruit development and the roots. And then the 2 is potassium or potash. Potash helps the plant deal with stress, whether it's heat stress, water stress. And so the main thing with these organic fertilizers and with feeding peppers is you want to make sure when you do plant them, right when you plant them, I'll actually fertilize them and I'll use 1 to 2 handfuls. You got to work this into the ground to break down good. So I'll take about a handful or 2. I'll work it in really good. I'll work it into the soil about 2 to 4 inches deep, and then I'll water good afterward. Another thing that I do is this has a pretty good amount of calcium in it, but plants that produce a lot of fruit like peppers do, you want a little calcium. So if your soil hasn't been worked and your garden is really new, especially if you're doing raised beds, I always will add extra calcium. So this is a very high calcium fertilizer, and this is just straight calcium, which is oyster shell meal, and this is 35%. So what I do with this is I like to work it around the plants. I know some people like to broadcast it through their whole garden. I like to go with every plant. And what I always do with feeding, calcium I only do right when I plant, so I only have to do this once, and then I'll do it again next year just once, so you don't have to keep on using it through the months. But the one thing I do when I'm planting them is I will go through and I'll feed them when I first plant, and again 1 to 2 handfuls. I will come back about 6 weeks later, I'll feed them again. Always water good right after you fertilize, because you want this to break down good, and then I'll feed them again in about 6 weeks. So with feeding, you're always feeding about 3 to 4 times, but it's crucial that don't feed once the fruit sets, because once the fruit starts setting, the plant has enough nutrients to carry those nutrients all the way until it ripens. I found that if you overfeed, you tend to have softer fruit, so when you harvest, you don't have a good shelf life with the fruit. So that's very important with fruit. I always will feed up until I see flowering or little pea-sized fruit, and then I stop feeding after that. And with peppers, you really want to watch pests, but peppers aren't really that high of a pest plant. But the main one that I always do watch for are some of the caterpillars in summer. The caterpillars like the hornworms and the cabbage loopers, they can really go after peppers. And so what I always do is I'll pick an organic spray. I like using BT. It's called Bacillus thuringiensis. It only works for caterpillars. It doesn't hurt beneficial. It doesn't hurt any other insects. So this is it right here. And so this is by Monterey Garden Products. And so with this, what I do is with caterpillars, they always get active in the summertime. So I like to spray once a month, starting around late May, early June. So I'll spray once in about June, once in July, and once in August. Okay, now we're going to talk about watering. And watering is a really important issue with peppers, because peppers do like a lot of water. But the one thing with growing them is they want consistent water. So in the ground, I always will start watering, and there's so many factors. It depends on where you're at, how hot it is, how windy it is. So you got to look at the environmental conditions. But I always start off, and I usually I'll water them really good on a Monday. I might check them on a Wednesday. If they're dry, I'll water them. If they're wet, I'll wait till Friday. So very consistent, and always people say, well, how much? How many gallons? And I like to water really slow. I don't really go into the gallons or how much, because it depends on how your soil takes up the water. Like sandy soil is going to take up the water quick, where clay is going to take it up slower. So you want to make sure you water really thoroughly and water slow, and then dig down and check about 2 to 3 inches down to see if that water is percolating down. That's important. But I usually very consistent. And then as you get closer to harvesting, I like to back the water off sometimes at once a week. I don't want to keep them so wet. And even growing them in containers. With containers, you're going to probably have to water them a lot more frequently. So again, you might check them on a Monday, give them a good soak. Check them Wednesday. If they're dry, wait and they'll water them right away. If they're wet, wait till Friday. But sometimes when we go more into the summer, you'll have to water them consistently. But one thing, again, always back off the water as you get close to harvesting, because you want those sugars to accumulate. Okay, when harvesting peppers, there's a lot of different tricks, but the main thing with harvesting is you really want to wait until they start to really ripen out. But what I do a lot of times is I do the pressure test. So what I like to do is I'll go up and I'll actually squeeze the pepper. If they're starting to soften, I will harvest them. And you look at the size of the pepper, because bell peppers are going to start getting big. And then if they're red bell peppers, they're going to go from a green to a yellowy color to a red, and then they'll be a brighter red. Sometimes when they go too ripe, you'll feel them very soft, and then they'll be more of a duller red. So look at the brightness of the color and then do the pressure test. So you want to sort of lightly squeeze them. Now with some of the hot peppers like jalapenos and Anaheims, you're really picking them in the green stage. And the green stage is what you usually ripen them when they're ripening. You can pick them in the red stage. Red, when peppers ripen out to red, and that can hold true with all of them, sweet peppers, hot peppers, they're going to have higher sugar levels. So that's the one thing. Even with jalapenos, most people pick them in the green stage because they're going to be hot, flavor is going to be good. But then when they start to ripen to a red, sometimes they call it a different pepper. They call them chipotles, and they're going to have higher sugar. They're going to be sweeter. So that's another thing. But always look at the color. But I always do the pressure test. And that holds true with all of them, because once they really ripen out, they're gonna get softer as they ripen. This is David Rizzo with Rogers Gardens. Thank you for joining me today. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, you can check us for more information on our website or come in the store.